Okay, so yeah, let's get started. This is part two of chapter 16, and in this chapter, we will go over uh, some of the key concepts that we learned in the last lecture on citric acid cycle, and um, we will also go over some reactions that are connected to citric acid cycle. Okay, and those will be especially in the context of anabolic reactions, reactions where we build new biomolecules starting from smaller precursors. So again, catabolism, or as we loosely call it, metabolism, catabolism of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, they all occur in three steps, right? So in the first stage, you can see here, you produce acetyl coenzyme A. Okay, so either whether you take glucose, fatty acid, or amino acid, you actually produce activated acetate. Okay, and when it's through glycolysis, end product of glycolysis is pyruvate, as you know, and pyruvate is actually brought into the mitochondria, where there is this massive complex. When we'll talk about those reactions one more time today, pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, that actually oxidatively decarboxylate pyruvate and alpha keto acid to generate acetyl coenzyme A. And so, of course, you extract some of the energies in the form of, NADH, etc., reducing equivalents. And in stage two, you have acetyl coenzyme A that gets oxidized with the help of citric acid cycle, and you produce 2 carbon. You take one molecule of acetyl coenzyme A, which is a 2 carbon molecule, and you release 2 molecules of carbon dioxide, basically. And you regenerate oxaloacetate, and the citric acid cycle runs. In that process, again, you produce reducing equivalents. And in the final stage, stage 3, where you take all those reduced electron carriers, NADH or FADH2, and you transport those electrons that are embedded in them to the respiratory chains. Respiratory chains are, sitting in the inner mitochondrial matrix, where they accept those electrons from the reduced electron carriers. And some of those complexes actually end up generating a proton gradient in the intermembrane space. That proton gradients flows downhill through the F0, F1 ATP synthase, and that F0, F1 ATP synthase will actually take ADP, an inorganic phosphate, and generate ATP. Ultimately, where those electrons end up, those electrons end up going to molecular oxygen, where molecular oxygen is reduced to water. Okay, so that's the stage 3. And so conversion of pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A happens with the help of this massive complex that we talked about in the last class, pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, that utilizes 5 coenzymes: coenzyme A, NAD+, thymine pyrophosphate, TPP, lipoate, and FAD. Okay, and that reaction is highly exergonic, even under cellular conditions. Okay, and the standard free energy is given, which is minus 33.4 kilojoule per mole. And so we will quickly review this, because this actually is a little bit complicated. So I thought I will go over that one more time. So pyruvate dehydrogenase complex itself has 3 types of catalytic activity represented by E1, E2, and E3. Those 3 enzymes are shown here in the bottom in pink. So first enzyme activity of E1, what we call is pyruvate dehydrogenase. Well, pyruvate will be brought into the E1 enzyme active site, and with the help of thymine pyrophosphate, it will be converted to hydroxyethylthymine pyrophosphate, also known as HETPP. And then that intermediate is then shuttled to the second enzyme, which will be E2, which is right here in the central, dihydrolipoyl transacetylase, where acetyl group will be transferred to the lipoic acid. So that's the second reaction, right? Hydroxyethyl group is transferred, and you can see that now you have formed acetyl dihydrolipoate right here. And in that same enzyme E2 active site, the next reaction will be the reaction number 3, where coenzyme A will come in and basically form acetyl coenzyme A, right? And at that point, you know that you actually have done the reaction, right? You can see that you have taken pyruvate, you have removed a carbon dioxide, and you have formed the acetyl coenzyme A. The fourth reaction that happens in the third enzyme, which will be E3, dihydrolipoyl dehydrogenase, is that it will take FAD and reduced form of dihydrolipoate and convert that back to oxidized form of lipoic acid. Okay. And so FAD will get itself reduced to FADH2. And third enzyme also does another reaction where it will oxidize FADH2 back to FAD using NAD plus system. Okay, so you have, this cycle can continue. You have continuous supply of FAD, so that cycles run. Pyruvate dehydrogenase is allosterically activated by fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. And if you recall, this is fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. This is an intermediate of glycolysis, right? So it gets activated by one of the intermediate of glycolysis, and it is inhibited by NADH and acetyl coenzyme A. So that's one way of allosterically regulating the activity of pyruvate dehydrogenase. Okay. The pyruvate dehydrogenase is also regulated by phosphorylation mechanism, which is the post-translational modifications, right? Phosphorylation is a post-translational modification mechanism to regulate enzyme activity. And you are seeing that throughout, right? Glycogen synthase kinase, there are various kinases that will actually phosphorylate enzymes, other enzymes, and regulate their activity. So there is an enzyme called PDH kinase. PDH kinase, as the name implies, is pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase that will actually phosphorylate PDH and regulate its activity. It turns out that phosphorylation inactivates it. So when the PDH kinase will phosphorylate PDH, it will inactivate it. PDH kinase itself is allosterically activated by NADH and acetyl coenzyme A. And it will be inhibited by low energy intermediates as signified by here ADP, NAD+, and the coenzyme A. So NADH and acetyl coenzyme A, as you can imagine and you have learned in the class, are represented as representing high energy status of the cell, right? So PDH kinase will be activated. Once PDH kinase is active, then it will go and phosphorylate pyruvate dehydrogenase complex and make it inactive. And that should all make sense to you. Okay, so this is something that you are used to seeing in this class, and I hope you are nicely enjoying it. So yeah, so whenever you have, so that's what in this slide you are seeing. Active pyruvate dehydrogenase is on the left-hand side, sunny side, and the inactive form is on the right-hand side. And it's the pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase that will actually phosphorylate it and make it into the inactive form. And there is obviously pyruvate dehydrogenase phosphatase on the other side that will actually make it remove the phosphate group or phosphoryl group and make it active fully. So when you have a high concentration of NADH to NAD plus or high concentration, and in here you are seeing in terms of ratios, high acetyl coenzyme A to coenzyme A ratio, which will reflect high energy status of the cell, then pyruvate dehydrogenase complex is inactive. And that is done by pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase. Okay, and in the low ratio, you see the pyruvate dehydrogenase phosphatase being activated. So you can have active pyruvate dehydrogenase. Cool. Okay, so I had given you this to look up, but I thought I will briefly go over it just so that, I know some of you really enjoy organic mechanisms. So I thought, we have only 20 slides, why not just go over it, and that will help you see how reactions happen, right? So look here, a carbanion form of TPP, right? You can see that they have just created a thiazole ylide structure here, sort of, and put just R1 and R2. They're just showing the business end of the molecule, and it's a carbanion ylide-like structure. And they're also showing you the pyruvate. So in the E1 active site of PDH, this reaction will happen. TPP will attack that carbonyl, right? It's an addition reaction, and you will form this kind of intermediate right here on the top. So as you see, that electron flow has to happen this way because you want to break the carbon dioxide, right? That carbon-carbon bond. So if that bond has to break, you must be able to stabilize that carbon on that purple, not purple, but blue carbon, right? And that can happen, as you can see here. Why would that happen? Look here, when you push O- to create a double bond between carbon and oxygen, and then you break that single bond between the purple carbon and the blue carbon, right? You will end up generating this carbanion that is shown here in this bracket, right? You have removed carbon dioxide, so you have decarboxylate, but you have this addition product still. And you can see that once you have carbanion and that on that blue carbon, that carbanion can be now resonance stabilized. And so that's the right-hand structure they are showing you in the resonance hybrid form. So that now should make sense to you completely how this reaction is happening. And so once the carbanion is stabilized there, that carbanion can attack the oxidized form of lipoic acid, which will be in the second enzyme E2 of PDH. And you will end up generating an intermediate that looks like here, right? So once you have that complex, you can see it's a tetrahedral species. A base will actually pick up proton from that complex, and you can see they're doing you arrow pushing in such a way that they're able to release or eliminate thiamine pyrophosphate. So you can redo that reaction again and again. And you have this product which is now covalently attached to this E2 enzyme, which is the acetyl lipoamide, right? What am I showing you there? I'm showing you right here, this acetyl lipoamide, right? And so once you have acetyl lipoamide, the second reaction will happen where coenzyme A will sneak in, and basically you form acetyl coenzyme A, and you have formed this dihydrolipoamide, right? Reduced form of that. And that reduced form of that dihydrolipoamide gets oxidized with the help of FAD. That's what they are showing you. FAD comes from the E3 enzyme of PDH. So then it goes back to the oxidized form, and then you form that FADH2. Remember, FADH2 must be oxidized back to FAD form. So that happens with the help of NAD+. That happens also in the E3 active site. So that's the reaction I wanted to show you. I know that I give you homework, but sometimes you don't have time to do that. So I thought I'll just go over it. Yeah, so with that, I just want to show you there are these molecules that act as biological tethers in a wide variety of metabolic and anabolic reactions. Okay, so if you look here on the top, it's part of the E2 of PDH complex, right? Dihydrolipoyl transacetylase enzyme of PDH. You can see that that's the lipoic acid. So the cofactor here is lipoate, right? And then you have in pyruvate carboxylase, if you remember, we talked about this reaction at length and I even showed you mechanism of this. You have biotin as the cofactor. And then you also have acyl carrier proteins, acyl carrier protein. These are, very important group of proteins. They actually are carrier of acyl intermediate and they are involved in fatty acid biosynthesis. And you can see the um, um, co-factor here is beta mercaptoethylamine that is covalently linked to pantothenic acid, right? So the reason that I am showing you this is that you can see that all these three enzymes as listed here, they carry this highly interesting cofactors that are needed in the enzymatic reactions, but they are attached through this long flexible linker as shown here in the blue bonds. Okay, and these allows these enzymes to actually shuttle the product of one reaction from one enzyme active site to other enzyme active site. Okay, so that's why this flexibility, that's why they call it tether, right? They're moving different groups from one active site to the other, and the flexibility therefore is important, and this is how they build flexibility. So in dihydrolipoyl transacetylase, it's the lysine residue of a protein that actually forms an amide bond with lipoic acid, right? Similarly, pyruvate carboxylate, again another lysine attaching with biotin, etc. So just wanted to let you know the importance of those. Now, reactions of citric acid cycles are shown here, right? And as I can say, we can just quickly go over what enters into the citric acid cycle is acetyl coenzyme A. A lot of times people are always confused, students are confused because they think that citric acid cycle starts from pyruvate. But it doesn't start from pyruvate. Pyruvate dehydrogenase complex is really not technically part of the citric acid cycle. It has its own reaction. It irreversibly will convert pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A. And of course, as you have seen, it's regulated very tightly. So, and that's consistent. Once it is an irreversible reaction under cellular conditions, you want to make sure that that enzyme is very tightly regulated, both maybe either by post-translational modifications such as phosphorylation or by allosteric means. In any case, so the cycle starts with oxaloacetate and acetate, activated acetate combining in the active site of citrate synthase to produce citrate. And then aconitase will catalyze the conversion of citrate to isocitrate, a tertiary alcohol to a secondary alcohol. And then isocitrate dehydrogenase will decarboxylate it, isocitrate, to generate alpha ketoglutarate. This is an irreversible reaction, third reaction. And then once you have alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex will also decarboxylate one of the carbon. And you will end up generating succinyl coenzyme A, right? So 1, 3, and 4, those are the irreversible reactions of citric acid cycle. And then once you have succinyl-CoA synthetase, as I said, synthetases means GTP or ATP are involved, would be involved. It basically will utilize either GDP or ADP, depending on what isoform of succinyl-CoA synthetase exists. It will make a high energy molecule, either GTP or ATP, and then you'll generate a symmetrical molecule, succinate. You can see that they are actually showing you carbons in the pink that actually came into the cycle. They are tracing it nicely all the way. So carbon dioxide that is leaving is not the same carbon that came in. But once you generate succinate, succinate is a symmetrical molecule. Carbon number 1 and 2 are indistinguishable from carbon number 3 and 4, and therefore they don't show it anymore. Regardless, succinate will get converted to fumarate oxidation by succinate dehydrogenase that uses the coenzyme FAD. You generate one equivalent of FADH2 there. Fumarate will then get converted to myelinate. Fumarase will catalyze that reaction. That's a hydration reaction. And myelinate then gets oxidized. That hydroxyl group gets oxidized to a ketone with myelinate dehydrogenase to oxaloacetate, and you regenerate oxaloacetate, right? So that's important thing to note. And conversion from succinate to fumarate to myelinate to oxaloacetate, those reactions are reversible and they are utilized in biochemistry quite frequently in many different types of metabolic pathways. Okay, so that's your citric acid cycle review, okay, in short. As I said, reaction number 6, 7, and 8 is a recurring theme. Okay, so oxidation of succinate to oxaloacetate, and this happens in many other pathways that would include when we talk about fatty acid breakdown, fatty acid metabolism, and amino acid breakdown. So we'll see those reactions again and again. Okay, and typically what happens in these reactions, as you have seen, you oxidize a single bond to a double bond, then you hydrate it selectively, stereospecifically across the double bond, and then once you have the alcohol, then you actually oxidize it to generate a ketone, right? So that would be oxaloacetate molecule. Cool, right? So one thing I've also wanted to say here is, I know that we are not going to do Biochem 2 together. So I just wanted to say something. There is an interesting and critical difference in the coenzymes that are often used in catabolic reactions and in anabolic reactions. Okay. So typically in catabolism, NAD plus serves as an oxidizing agent, okay? And it is often reduced to NADH, as you are seeing, right? When we talk about anabolic reactions, where you actually are making larger biomolecules from smaller precursors, it's typically NADPH that serves as a reducing agent, okay? Not NADH. And that's some separation is there among the pathways, and there are good reasons for that, but we'll not go into that. But it is the NADPH that serves as a reducing agents in anabolic reactions. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Typically, that's anyway. I wanted to also show you some, we are mostly concerned here with mammalian biochemistry, but on occasion you will see that we'll talk about some metabolic pathways relevant to bacteria or even plants, and we'll do that in today's class. You will see. Now, if you have anaerobic bacteria, right, bacteria which do not need molecular oxygen for their growth and survival, it turns out that they can carry out citric acid cycle, but carry out in a manner that would be incomplete. Okay, so you will not have the same 8 reactions of citric acid cycles. And why is that? it turns out that these bacteria are less evolved than us, obviously. By not carrying out citric acid cycle, complete citric acid cycle, they are able to actually produce very, very needed molecules that would be required for their survival. Okay, so in anabolic pathways, for example, synthesis of a new protein, new enzymes, heme, etc. So some of these anaerobic bacteria, it turns out, if you look at their genome, you will see that they lack an enzyme called alpha-ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. That's a very important intermediate, right, of citric acid cycle. That's the third step, irreversible step. So what happens in those bacterial metabolic cycle? Well, you bring acetyl coenzyme A or paper pyruvate, right? And you generate oxaloacetate, let's say, from paper pyruvate. Pyruvate carboxylase, for example, can generate oxaloacetate, right? So acetyl coenzyme A, when it's brought in, it turns out that you'll make citrate. They have enzymes for that. They will make isocitrate. So they do have, citrate synthase. They have aconitase, but they will even convert isocitrate to alpha-ketoglutarate. So they will have even the enzyme isocitrate dehydrogenase, but they will not have alpha-ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. So as a result, what happens is that alpha-ketoglutarate accumulates. And alpha-ketoglutarate is a very, 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 very important intermediate, metabolic intermediate, okay, metabolite. You can utilize, and bacteria do, utilize alpha-ketoglutarate to make certain amino acids. For example, you can make glutamic acids, and from there you can make some other amino acids. You can make some, so you can actually make, amino acids, right? On the other side, once you have oxaloacetate, oxaloacetate can also be utilized. You remember the reversible reaction? We'll talk about reaction number 6, 7, 8. Yeah, they can do it in reverse. So you can actually generate succinate, and from succinate, you can also generate succinyl coenzyme A. And succinyl coenzyme A, turns out, is also a very, 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 very important metabolite that can be utilized to produce certain nucleotides and heme, etc. So they purposefully have evolved to carry out an incomplete citric acid cycle. So actually they can synthesize important precursors for their survival. Pretty cool, right? Just remove one enzyme. And this was, I thought, a little bit important to give you perspective on, that indeed the enzymes of citric acid cycle can be utilized in anabolic pathways as well. That was an example, right?
Professor?
Yes?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So I know that E. coli, they can actually, like, the culture can switch from anaerobic to aerobic.
Mm-hmm.
So would the citric acid cycle change when it switches from that state?
Yeah, so this is more like bacteria which primarily live under anaerobic conditions.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you actually, we talked about one particular example, I think very early on, where I showed you how heme was being produced if you grow the bacteria under aerobic conditions, and then you can expose that bacteria back to anaerobic condition, and metabolism just switches.
Right.
But here we are talking about the evolution where anaerobic bacteria, they just don't do complete citric acid cycle.
Right. So to study how the aerobic bacteria change, like transition to anaerobic, are you able to maybe observe how the enzyme contents of the 100%. Citric acid cycle are switching?
100%. So you could actually, these days, the technology is so good that you can do the entire genome profile of when you are growing the bacteria under aerobic condition and anaerobic condition, and you can see which enzymes are turned on, which enzymes are turned off.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now back to our metabolism, right? People often ask, so can the citric acid cycle provide intermediates for biosynthesis for anabolic reactions? And answer is yes, it does. Okay, so alpha ketoglutarate, as I said, alpha Kg, for example, can be transaminated to make glutamate, okay, and which can be utilized further to make purine nucleotides, arginine, proline, and glutamine, etc. Okay. Succinyl coenzyme A can be used to make porphyrins, in proteins that utilize heme. Fumarate and oxaloacetates can be used to make, other amino acids and some pyrimidine nucleotides. So these are very, very important intermediates of anabolic reactions. Okay, so they can actually be utilized. So we always think about citric acid cycle as a cycle that generates energy, right? But oftentimes when there is a need to make a new molecules, when there is a need to regulate the pathways so that we can turn on anabolic pathways, then these intermediates can be siphoned away from the citric acid cycle and utilized to make those important molecules. So here I'm showing you a role of citric acid cycle in anabolism, right? So if you look at this, just look at the blue reactions, right? Blue arrows. Okay, so you start out from the top, right? Pyruvate, acetyl coenzyme A. You can see that they go through the citric acid cycle, right? Cycle reactions are all there. But you also will notice that the intermediates of citric acid cycles can be siphoned away, right? So arrows going outward. For example, citrate can be taken out and be utilized to synthesize fatty acids and sterols. Alpha ketoglutarate can be siphoned away to generate glutamate by transamination reactions that you will see when we talk about amino acid metabolism. And from glutamate, you can actually make purines. You can make other amino acids like arginine, proline, glutamine. Succinyl coenzyme A is one of the key intermediate for making heme compounds like porphyrins. Okay. Oxaloacetate. Oxaloacetate can be siphoned away to make aspartate, asparagine, and from there, they can be utilized to make pyrimidines. Okay. Oxaloacetate, can be converted to PEP, phosphoenol pyruvate, that can be utilized to make glucose via gluconeogenesis, right? PEP is also a very important intermediate for making other amino acids such as serine, glycine, cysteine, phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. So you can see that intermediates of citric acid cycle can be taken away if needed to in anabolic reactions. So what happens when you need to actually run the cycle again? So it turns out that there are reactions that actually can happen to fill the intermediates of citric acid cycle if needed. Okay, and those reactions are called anaplerotic reactions, filling up. Literally, it means filling up reactions. Okay, and what do? They actually replenish the depleted citric acid cycle intermediates, so citric acid cycle can run efficiently and produce energy by oxidative metabolism. What are those anaplerotic reactions? There are 4 of them. Okay. Pyruvate carboxylase, if you remember, pyruvate carboxylase enzyme, do you remember? Yeah, we talk about that enzyme. Pyruvate carboxylase will basically, it's one of the biotin enzymes we talked about that will actually convert pyruvate to oxaloacetate. So that's one reaction that is an example of anaplerotic reaction. Okay. PEP carboxykinase reaction, you remember? PEP carboxykinase. Yeah. We talked about gluconeogenesis reaction, right? Conversion of phosphoenol pyruvate to oxaloacetate. That's the reversible reaction. So that's one reaction that actually also can fill up the intermediates of citric acid cycle, right? PEP carboxylase. PEP carboxylase is an enzyme that usually is found in plants and some bacteria, right? That will take bicarbonate and catalyze the reaction of addition of bicarbonate to phosphoenol pyruvate, and you will eventually form this 4-carbon compound oxaloacetate. So that's the other reaction that is an anaplerotic reaction. And then finally, the maleic enzymes where you can actually take pyruvate, and these maleic enzymes will convert pyruvate to malate, right? So, so those are the 4 reactions that actually are classified as anaplerotic reactions, and I show them here again. So pyruvate carboxylase reaction, where pyruvate and bicarbonate and ATP will be converted to oxaloacetate. That happens primarily in the liver and kidney. And you know why, right? That's where gluconeogenesis happens. PEP carboxykinase, phosphoenol pyruvate, carbon dioxide, and GDP to generate oxaloacetate. Those happens in heart and skeletal muscles. PEP carboxylase reaction, I was just telling you, where you take PEP and bicarbonate and you'll make oxaloacetate. That typically happens in higher plants, yeast bacteria. And then conversion of pyruvate to malate happens with the help of these maleic enzymes that will take bicarbonate and NADPH and basically convert pyruvate to malate. And this is, widely found group of enzymes that are there both in eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic. So those are the 4 reactions, what we call anaplerotic reactions. Cool, right? Okay, so we cannot, not discuss regulation, right, of TCA cycle. So as in glycolysis, 3 reactions are the key sites of regulation. And that's because those 3 reactions are completely reversible even under cellular conditions. And those are the reactions catalyzed by citrate synthase, isocitrate dehydrogenase, alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. Okay. And we just talked about the regulation of pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. I just color coded this morning, just so as to distinguish that this is not part of the citric acid cycle, technically speaking. But I just wanted to keep that in mind, that pyruvate dehydrogenase complex also is regulated allosterically. ATP, NADH, acetyl coenzyme A, and fatty acids usually inhibit pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. And AMP, NAD plus, coenzyme A, calcium will activate it. Whenever you see calcium as a ligand, allosteric ligand, calcium ion reflects the need for ATP, because typically when the muscles contract, you have calcium levels going up. And that's a signal that energy status of the cell is low. Okay, so that's something that you already know. I'm just showing you the reaction one more time. And you can see here that reaction 1, 3, and 4 are completely reversible even under cellular conditions. So it's not surprising that they are at the site of regulation, right? And so how do metabolite flow from PDH complex through citric acid cycle and how they are regulated. What is their effect on different enzymes is shown here and summarized here. Okay, this is not just citric acid cycle. This includes PDH complex. So oftentimes, when you see that red X, this basically means that when the concentrations of these intermediates go up, those will have inhibitory effect, right? And your green triangle in the circle typically means that whenever concentrations of these intermediates go up, they will be activating, right? Regulating the pathway towards activation. So you can see that pyruvate dehydrogenase complex is allosterically inhibited, right? Whenever the ratio of ATP to ADP, right? NADH to NAD plus and acetyl-CoA to CoA ratios are high, right? That will suggest an energy sufficient metabolic state, is it not? So that makes sense that PDH is inhibited in those cases. And when these ratios decreases, allosteric activation of pyruvate will happen because pyruvate dehydrogenase complex will be activated. And those ligands are shown here, AMP, coenzyme A, NAD+, and calcium plus too. Okay, now, once you are in the citric acid cycle, right? Rate of flow through the citric acid cycle. What will regulate that, right? Well, it can be limited by the availability of the first reaction, right? First reaction, citrate synthase reaction is also irreversible, right? So if you limit the availability of the substrates for the citrate synthase, then the cycle will slow down, right? So that would be the molecules such as oxaloacetate, acetyl coenzyme A, right? And also NAD plus, because remember you will need NAD plus in 3 reactions in citric acid cycle, right? Those 3 reactions are where you are using NAD plus and you are converting that NAD plus to NADH. So if those substrate concentrations decreases, the rate of flow through the citric acid cycle intermediate will be slowed down, right? So oxaloacetate, acetyl coenzyme A, or NAD plus. But citrate synthase itself, you can see, is inhibited. So NADH, succinyl coenzyme A, and citrate, product of its own, and ATP. These are 1, 2, 3, 4 ligands that have binding pocket on the citrate synthase, right? And so when their concentration rises, that will suggest a high energy status of the cell, and therefore citrate synthase, the first reaction of citric acid cycle, will be downregulated. ADP concentration increases, citrate synthase will be activated. Remember, both ADP and AMP reflect low energy status of the cell. But you can see that ADP is not an allosteric ligand of pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, right? Vice versa, AMP is not a ligand for citrate synthase, allosteric ligand. So that's something that you have to pay attention to. I always tell students. Anyway, so once you have the third reaction is isocitrate going to alpha ketoglutarate, right? For isocitrate dehydrogenase, ATP is the inhibitory ligand, and calcium ion and NADP is activating ligand. From alpha ketoglutarate to succinyl CoA, so that will be catalyzed by alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex. Succinyl coenzyme A and NADH are the inhibitory ligands, allosteric ligands, and calcium is the activating ligand, right? So those are the 3 steps that actually are regulated allosterically. Cool, right? Now, that brings me to this very interesting and important question. And I have alluded to this in my last lectures. can any organisms use acetate as their sole carbon source for growth? Remember, for growth, you need sugars. Most organisms need sugar. Okay, so the question here we are asking is, can you use acetate and make sugars? Like net, okay, use the carbons of acetate and make those carbons into sugars. And you know that mammals can't do that, right? Because there is no pathway for us to take fatty acid, metabolize it to acetyl coenzyme A, and take acetyl coenzyme A and do gluconeogenesis to make glucose. It just won't happen. Pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A conversion is only one directional, right? You can only convert pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A. You cannot go back. So you know, if you think about this, when you we are talking about this, okay, acetate. When you plant a seed, right, like 6 inches underneath the ground, those seeds don't get access to sun energy. Okay, they really don't. It's dark down there. But it turns out that those seeds are packed with fatty acids. They are literally packed with lipid bodies. Okay, that's all they have going for them. So how do they license their growth? How do they generate some kind of stem and fuel their growth so they can come out finally on the ground, and then perhaps they can use sunlight to do photosynthesis and grow, license their growth, right? And become a giant tree, for example. So glyoxylate cycle is the cycle that allows these plants to grow in the dark. Okay, that's pretty cool. This is really, really exciting. You will see that. You know, we don't want to, as I said, talk about plant biology or biochemistry too much, but I think in the context of citric acid cycle, it's worth looking at it. And that's why I'm going to talk to you about, okay? What does glyoxylate cycle do? It turns out that glyoxylate cycle allows net synthesis of carbohydrates and other intermediates from acetate, okay, in these systems. It's not possible in mammals, but in plants it is possible, and it does happen. And I will show you how. So glyoxylate cycle happens in a special organelle called glyoxysome, offers a solution for plants and some bacteria and algae to grow in dark. Okay, how? It turns out, so remember, when we are thinking about growth, right, we are thinking about ability to make sugar and utilize that sugar to make ATP, etc. Okay. In this, as we will see, there are 2 irreversible reactions, right, of citric acid cycle, catalyzed by, remember, isocitrate dehydrogenase and alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. Those 2 irreversible CO2 evolving reactions are bypassed, means they are skipped. And then in this cycle, an extra acetate molecule is utilized. That means acetyl coenzyme A. So when you bypass those 2 irreversible CO2 steps, what do? It turns out there are reactions that you do uniquely in glyoxylate cycle. And those reactions are catalyzed by isocitrate lyase and mylate synthase. These are called short circuiting enzymes. And I will show you why they are called short circuiting enzymes. Okay. So this is the summary. Let's look at the reaction itself. Now, glyoxylate cycle is shown here in the left, and your citric acid cycle reactions are shown here on the right, 8 steps. Let's count the reactions of glyoxylate cycle, right? So it looks like acetyl coenzyme is entering the cycle and taking oxaloacetate and actually making citrate. Oh, just like in citric acid cycle, right? Citrate synthase does that. And then you make citrate. You are making citrate in glyoxylate cycle as well. Then citrate gets converted to isocitrate with the help of aconitase. That also happens in the citric acid cycle. But then once you have isocitrate, you don't make alpha ketoglutarate, okay? And you don't make succinyl coenzyme A. Those are the two reactions that are bypassed, catalyzed by isocitrate dehydrogenase and alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. Okay, so those two reactions are bypassed. So what do? You start out with isocitrate and you directly convert isocitrate to succinate. Okay. So that's the new enzyme isocitrate lyase does. So you can see here isocitrate is cleaved. So isocitrate is a 6 carbon molecule, right? You can see that. And so those 6 carbons are cleaved into, that's why lyase, into 2 molecules, one 4 carbon molecule, symmetrical molecule succinate, and the other molecule is a 2 carbon molecule called glyoxylate. Glyoxylate structure is very, very easy to remember. It's an aldehyde on one carbon and carboxylate on the other carbon. That's glyoxylate. Okay. So that's why lyase, if you recall your definition of enzymes, this isocitrate is being cleaved into 2 carbon molecule and a 4 carbon molecule. Then glyoxylate actually is part of the cycle. Succinate leaves the cycle. That's important to note. Succinate here is part of the cycle of citric acid cycle, but here succinate is leaving. We'll talk about that why and how that could be useful in the big picture, right? But let's go through the reaction. Glyoxylate then will combine with another molecule of acetyl coenzyme A, another molecule, right? So 2 molecules of acetyl coenzyme A are entering the cycle. And so you make 2 carbon and 2 carbon, you made 4 carbon molecule, mylate. L-mylate, more technically speaking. Okay, that carbon is chiral. Anyway, so you see, you make mylate, and then mylate dehydrogenase is the enzyme that already you know, that will convert mylate to oxaloacetate, and that's how the cycle runs. So isocitrate lyase and mylate synthase, they short circuit the citric acid cycle, forming mylate from another molecule of acetyl coenzyme A and glyoxylate. All right. Okay, that's why I have put them in red box, those 2 enzymes, short circuiting enzymes. So how many reactions there are? Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So what's happening? Just think about it for a moment. What's happening here? And glyoxylate cycle, by the way, was also, discovered by Hans Krebs. What's happening if you look at it, chemically speaking, from a chemist point of view, you see that 2 molecules of acetyl coenzyme A come in, and a 4 carbon molecule leaves the cycle, which is leaving as a succinate. Oh, interesting. If succinate leaves the cycle, potentially what does that mean? It means that if your seeds are packed with fatty acids, and if you can metabolize those fatty acids into acetyl coenzyme A by beta oxidation of fatty acids, then you can utilize acetyl coenzyme A to generate succinate using glyoxylate cycle in glyoxysome. And succinate, could in principle be converted to glucose. How? Because you can do succinate to fumarate, right? Fumarate to mylate, mylate to oxaloacetate. Oxaloacetate, is a very, very known intermediate for gluconeogenesis. So yes, technically you can make sugar. That's why plants can survive. Let's look at it. Okay. So glyoxysomes, is this very unique organelle. And so to make sugars, it actually borrows certain reactions from mitochondria. Okay. So glyoxysomes don't contain all the enzymes needed to run the glyoxylate cycle. Okay. So, for example, succinate dehydrogenase, fumarase, and mylate dehydrogenase doesn't exist. They're not present in glyoxysome. So they borrow these three reactions from mitochondria so they can convert succinate to oxaloacetate. How? Can you show me pictorially? And answer is yes. Look here. This is a germinating cucumber seed. Okay. So cucumber seed, which is in the, was kept in dark, and it's actually germinating. If you look at the cells, right, of this seed, and there, I believe they're using electron micrograph. Yes, right. What you'll notice in the cell is that there is glyoxysome. So there are, you can just stain the glyoxysome with some proteins, right? Some antibodies of certain proteins that are only found in glyoxysome. So you can nicely visualize it. And you can stain mitochondria. I mean, this is not an antibody-based staining. This is just electron micrograph. They have stained it with some heavy metals, etc. But what you'll notice is very fascinating. Okay, you do see multiple copies of mitochondria, right? But you see glyoxysomes sandwiched between the fat body, lipid body, and mitochondria. It sits right in the middle. So it can cross talk with both lipid body as well as mitochondria. It's absolutely fascinating. Think about it, how cool this is. Yeah, it literally, you will see that each glyoxysome is surrounded by lipid body and mitochondria. It's making contact. How is that useful? I can show you in what is known. Okay. So you have in the seeds, right, lipid body, right? You saw that, which would be, let's say, neutral fat, triacylglycerol. When triacylglycerol is metabolized, you will make glycerols, and lots of fatty acids will be released, right? Those fatty acids will diffuse in to the glyoxysome. The organelle just sits there. So there are fatty acid transporters that will bring fatty acids into the glyoxysome. Glyoxysome fatty acids will be metabolized to acetyl coenzyme A. Okay, so there are beta oxidation enzymes that exist in glyoxysome. So you'll generate acetyl coenzyme A. Now, once you have acetyl coenzyme A, glyoxysome will run glyoxylate cycle, right? With the reaction we just talked about it. But when it's running every turn of the cycle, it will consume 2 molecules of activated acetate and release 1 molecule of succinate, 4 carbon. Succinate will leave glyoxysome, okay, and diffuse into the mitochondria, where you have the enzymes that can actually take succinate and convert that to fumarate, and then convert that to mylate, and then convert mylate to oxaloacetate. Remember the recurring reaction number 6, 7, 8, those are the reactions. Okay, so in mitochondria, you can do that, right? And mylate also has a transporter. If you recall, mylate can be exited out into the cytosol of the seed, where mylate can be converted back to oxaloacetate, and then you can actually do gluconeogenesis to make 6 carbon sugars, etc. that can feed The synthesis of 6-carbon sugars, hexoses, from oxaloacetates is actually, described in chapter 20, which we are not going to talk about. That is the biosynthesis of sugars in bacteria and plant. But you will have hopefully the textbook, and someday when you are bored, you can look that up. But based on mammalian biochemistry that you have learned in this class, you know that there is clearly a path that exists in plants and in us, where you can take oxaloacetate and make 6-carbon sugar using gluconeogenesis. So that's what happens. Okay. So the reaction of glyoxylate cycle, can proceed, right, or can proceed independently sometimes when needed. Okay, and that depends on how the metabolites are compartmentalized into one of these compartments, right? And so let's look at the regulation of glyoxylate cycle and citric acid cycle, right? Plants will need citric acid cycle to grow, right? And plants, seeds might need glyoxylate cycle to actually license their growth when there is no sunlight, right? So how is these two cycles regulated? Coordinated regulation of glyoxylate and citric acid cycle. This is a little bit of a busy slide, I agree, okay? And it can be a little confusing for you, right? But let's look here on the right-hand side. Let's focus our attention here. What are we seeing here? If you look here, you can see that you are taking acetyl coenzyme A on the top, and then you are bifurcating it. You are basically channeling it in two different pathways. One, glyoxylate cycle, that typically is an anabolic pathway where you will be making new glucose molecules, new amino acids and nucleotides using oxaloacetate, etc., right? So it's a sort of anabolic reaction. Citric acid cycle is a catabolic reaction where you can actually take acetyl coenzyme A and pass the intermediates through citric acid cycle whenever your cells need ATP. So one is catabolic reaction on the right hand side, and the other one is anabolic reaction on the left hand side. Glyoxylate cycle is anabolic sets of reaction, and citric acid cycle is catabolic sets of reactions. And you know by now in this class is that when you are doing catabolic reactions, anabolic reactions are turned off. They are reciprocally regulated, right? So there must be a mechanism to regulate the conversion of acetyl coenzyme A or the intermediates of metabolism of acetyl coenzyme A into either glyoxylate cycle or citric acid cycle. And how does that happen? It turns out that the enzyme that actually regulates how isocitrate gets partitioned is isocitrate dehydrogenase. Okay, so that's the enzyme that actually very tightly gets regulated. Okay, so that's what is shown here, written here on the left hand side. Regulation of isocitrate dehydrogenase activity determines the partitioning of isocitrate between the glyoxylate and citric acid cycle. So, right? So isocitrate will go left or go right. It will depend on the activity of isocitrate dehydrogenase. That's the key enzyme. It turns out that this enzyme, isocitrate dehydrogenase, is also regulated by phosphorylation. Okay, so there are protein kinases that when active, they will phosphorylate isocitrate dehydrogenase and they will make it inactive. Okay, so when enzyme is inactivated by phosphorylation by specific protein kinase, isocitrate gets diverted into the biosynthetic reactions via the glyoxylate cycle. So isocitrate will go left. Okay, when isocitrate dehydrogenase is inactivated by certain protein kinases. Why would that be? Think about for a moment. Let's say you do not need, your cells or plant cells don't need ATP. Their energy status is quite happy. They have enough ATP, but they need to make new proteins, new enzymes, new nucleotides. You don't want to bring them here on the right hand side, right? So certain intermediates of glycolysis, etc., right? They will regulate the activity of protein kinase. Okay, so once you need the ATP, then that protein kinase will be inhibited. Okay, why? Because the energy status of the cells will be low. You will have AMP and ADP, those low energy molecules, and that will regulate the activity of protein kinase in such a way that isocitrate dehydrogenase is not phosphorylated by that protein kinase. Okay, and so when isocitrate dehydrogenase is not phosphorylated, you know that isocitrate dehydrogenase will be active, and therefore it will move the isocitrate through citric acid cycle to make ATP. Cool. And when the enzyme is activated by dephosphorylation, so there is a phosphatase involved, right? You can see green arrows in the circle. When phosphatases are activated, right, then they will remove the phosphate group from isocitrate dehydrogenase, and removal of isocitrate dehydrogenase will make the isocitrate dehydrogenase active, and those intermediates will go and make ATP. I think I may have said it reverse when I was talking about protein kinase part, but again, I will repeat that, okay? Just if I think I did. So this isocitrate dehydrogenase is can be regulated by a protein kinase as well as a protein phosphatase. Okay, when protein kinase is activated, it will go and phosphorylate isocitrate dehydrogenase. Isocitrate dehydrogenase, once it is phosphorylated, it will become inactive, right? Once isocitrate dehydrogenase is inactive, right, isocitrate will go through the glyoxylate cycle to make glucose, right? Will go into biosynthesis pathway. On the other hand, when energy is needed, phosphatases will be activated, right? And phosphatases will go and dephosphorylate isocitrate dehydrogenase. Once isocitrate dehydrogenase is dephosphorylated, right, it will be activated, and once it is activated, it will start bringing isocitrate through the citric acid cycle to make ATP. Cool. Is that clear to everyone? I hope it is. And so that actually will conclude our discussion of citric acid cycle, chapter 16.